Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our distinguished panelists and everyone participating today virtually to this launching event of the Global Study on Firearms Trafficking 2020. I'm John Brandolino, the Director for the Division of Treaty Affairs for the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Today, we're going to be releasing the Global Study on Firearms Trafficking, which was drafted in the context of UNODC's initiative on monitoring illicit arms flows, which serves to enhance the understanding about illicit firearms flows and their links to various forms of crime. It's also been a project that we've used directly to look at measuring the SDG that deals with countering illicit arms flows. The questions on the study and the presentations of the panelists can be asked throughout the event in the, I believe, in the chat room of the virtual format. So if you have questions for the panelists at some point, you can put them in the chat room, and then we will try to answer them at the end of after all the presenters have spoken, if we have time. And we're going to start with the high-level opening part of our launch. And I'm very pleased here to have we will have three distinguished speakers. And I'm going to just introduce them briefly first, then I'll turn to them one at a time. The first, of course, is our Executive Director of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, Ms. Ghada Wali, who has been a strong advocate for the implementation of the mandates of UNODC across the globe. And of course, she has very successfully steered our work during this continuing COVID-19 pandemic. So we're pleased to have her here with us today. We will be having Mr. Olivier Onidi, the Deputy Director General for the Directorate General for Migration and Home Affairs for the European Union Commission. And Olivier has been a great supporter of our work, and the European Commission particularly has been the biggest supporter of our programmatic work on illicit firearms trafficking since the creation of the Global Firearms Program back in 2011. And they've also have supported and funded this particular study. So we're pleased to be working with them and for their support. And then we finally, at the high opening session, are very pleased to have here Ambassador Luis Javier Campuzano Peña, who's the permanent representative of Mexico to the UN in Vienna, who will represent the chair of the 7th session of the Working Group on Firearms, which meets in the next 2 days. The actual chair will be Gonzalo Fabian Medina Hernandez, who is the head of cabinet of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, but he was unable to arrive in Vienna today. We hope to have him here today. He will be arriving tomorrow in time to chair the group, the working group, so we look forward to having him, but we're very pleased to have Ambassador here to represent Mexico, Mexico has always been a strong supporter of our work in the firearms area, and it's an issue where they have contributed a lot when it comes to expertise, data, and also, of course, strong interest. So I will start the presentations, turn first to Ms. Ghada Wali, the Executive Director of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Ms. Wali, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, John. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us in the launch of UNODC's Global Study on Firearms Trafficking 2020. I would like to welcome Mr. Olivier Onidi of the European Commission and the Permanent Representative of Mexico, Ambassador Luis Javier Campuzano. I think he's joining us today on one of the very first of his responsibilities in Vienna, so welcome back to Vienna. He is representing the chair of the 7th session of the Working Group on Firearms, and I would like to thank them for joining me at today's event. Both the European Commission and Mexico have long been key partners in UNODC's efforts to prevent and counter illicit firearm trafficking and related forms of crime. I'm grateful to the European Commission for providing financial support to UNODC so UNODC could produce this study, and for their efforts to keep illicit firearms on the global political agenda. I also wish to thank the World Customs Organization, which contributed important seizure data to our research. The study reflects information from more than 100 countries and territories, most of it received by UNODC through the Illicit Arms Flows Questionnaire. Part of UNODC's Monitoring Illicit Arms Flows initiative, the questionnaire represents a standardized data collection methodology, which also supports the monitoring of progress on Sustainable Development Goal Target 16.4 to significantly reduce illicit financial and arms flows by 2030. This work draws on UNODC's role as guardian of the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its protocol against the illicit manufacturing and trafficking . I'm pleased that we are launching this publication now with the group meeting in Vienna this week. The global study focuses on the serious and too often hidden problem of firearms trafficking, which poses a grave threat to human life and to international security, and which serves as an enabler and multiplier of violence and crime in every part of the world. Firearms are involved in more than half of all homicides globally and more than 3/4 in the Americas. Usually manufactured for legal markets, firearms can be diverted into illegal markets at any point in their life cycle. Durable commodities, they can be easily reused and resold. Illicit firearms are tools of power for terrorists and organized criminal groups alike, as well as a lucrative trafficking commodity. The UN Security Council adopted 2 resolutions last year highlighting the threat of terrorists benefiting financially and logistically from transnational organized crime, including by profiting from the trafficking of illicit arms. When law enforcement seizes illicit arms, they also find illicit drugs, counterfeit goods, trafficked cultural property, and natural resources. Most firearms seizures are made within national territories, with seizures at borders on average accounting for less than 10% of all interceptions. Based on the routes of seized firearms, transnational trafficking flows appear to be concentrated within continents. Some 464,000 people were killed in homicides in 2017, 54% of them by firearms. According to the data received for the study, some 550,000 firearms were seized worldwide in 2016 and 2017. However, we know the real global figure is much higher. This disparity reflects underreporting and continuing gaps in data collection, but also difficulties faced by criminal justice systems in pursuing firearm trafficking. Countries, on average, seized around 2/3 of firearms on the grounds of illicit possessions, according to the legal justifications given by national authorities. Trafficking was named as the legal justification in only around 9% of cases. However, when the criminal context of the seizure was factored in after further investigation, the proportion of seized weapon connected to trafficking more than doubled to 19%. By shedding light on these challenges and on the origin and trafficking routes of firearms, the study can support governments in strengthening law enforcement and criminal justice responses to detect and disrupt illicit flows, dismantle the criminal organizations and networks responsible, and bring the perpetrators to justice. Through its Global Firearms Program, UNODC supports member states to implement the Firearms Protocol, offering an integrated approach to the complex threat of illicit firearms that draws on the office's experience in addressing interlinked challenges of terrorism, crime, and corruption. In addition to administering the questionnaire, UNODC also helps to strengthen the capacity of member states to collect and analyze firearms-related data and produces analysis of firearms trafficking at global, regional, and national levels. Over the past 9 years, the office has supported some 65 countries in Africa and the Middle East, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Southeastern and Eastern Europe, as well as South and Central Asia, to strengthen legislative and policy development, preventive and security measures, criminal justice responses, international cooperation, and information exchange, as well as the monitoring of illicit arms flows. We also supported and facilitated the exchange of data and analysis between 20 EU countries. UNODC is also leading efforts to secure international air and maritime transport and supply chains against illicit firearms through our global container control, AirCop, and maritime crime programs. In February this year, together with UNOCT and with the backing of CEST and UNODA, we launched a joint project on addressing the terrorism arms crime nexus in Central Asian countries to help deprive territories of weapons and profits from the illegal arms trade. To further address the important regional dimensions of firearms trafficking challenges and to gather regional perspectives, UNODC will be holding webinars from September. The series will begin with the EU, the Western Balkans, Eastern Europe, Latin America, West and Central Africa, Central Asia, and the Middle East and North Africa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year we mark the 20th anniversary of the Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and the 15th anniversary of the Firearms Protocol entering into force. The global study on firearms trafficking represents an important step in expanding the evidence base on firearms trafficking. It also shows that much more work needs to be done to further enhance the operational protocols and capacities to systematically collect and analyze data on illicit firearms. For example, almost 1/3 of the countries replying to the illicit arms flows questionnaire reported that the data set either did not cover the entire national territory or did not cover the operations of all authorities in charge of seizing firearms. Investigative efforts and related data collection clearly vary among the different steps of the criminal justice chain. To prevent and combat illicit firearms trafficking, we need to scale up capacities, procedures, and tools to identify the illicit origin of seized firearms and to record the results in an accessible manner. In this regard, I very much welcome the discussions of the working group starting tomorrow, which can contribute to advancing progress in these areas. The working group will also address new forms of manufacturing and trafficking of firearms and the responsiveness of the protocol to address challenges such as the online trade in illicit firearm parts and ammunition, trafficking via postal services, and the exploitation of legal loopholes to acquire, convert, or upgrade weapons into firearms. UNODC is here to assist you in these efforts. I hope the analysis presented in the global study is useful to you, and I encourage member states to keep sharing information so we can build back better responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wally, for highlighting some of the information coming from the report and also the needs, highlighting the needs to strengthen information and increase the amount of information we gather. I have the pleasure now to give the floor to the representative of the, as we mentioned, the chair of the working group on firearms, which actually has given the main mandate for UNODC to conduct this the surveys and put forth the report. I have the pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador Campuzano for his remarks. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Director Gadawali. The government of Mexico deeply appreciates the invitation to be present at the launching of the global study. It is a great honor for me to join you and your distinguished colleagues on behalf of the chair of the 7th meeting of the working groups on firearms, Mr. Fabian Medina. The presentation of the global study is most timely, as it is happening just moments before our colleagues working in the next room will hopefully finish today the questionnaire that will allow to assess the implementation of the obligations of the parties to the optional protocol on firearms. Moreover, this event represents a golden opportunity and a prelude for the beginning of the 7th meeting of the working group, which will be held here tomorrow and on Friday. You can rest assured, Madam Wally, that the working group will benefit greatly from the findings, the information, and the data contained in the global study. And this, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, has been at the core of the efforts undertaken by the working group since it was established at the initiative of Mexico in 2010. On the one side, to promote the development and collection of better data in order to improve the analysis of the causes and consequences of the illicit manufacturing and trafficking of arms, and on the other, to promote international cooperation and foster partnerships. Mexico has always considered fundamental contributing substantively to the efforts undertaken by the UNODC to prepare the global study on firearms. The numerous mentions of my country in the study reflects the amount and quality of information provided by my authorities, as we believe on the importance of having a better understanding of the challenges faced as a first step to develop and implement better policies. We hope that future editions of this study and other similar reports include more substantive information provided by more countries and particularly by the major producers and biggest firearms markets. You can count on the support of the Centro de Excelencia, INEGI, UNODC, to help states on strengthening their national capabilities on data generation and collection and information analysis. On that point, Executive Director, I would like to praise your leadership in guiding the different UNODC teams that have prepared this global study, as well as the World Drug Report 2020 and the World Wildlife Crime Report 2020, presented some days ago, to exploring, among others, the linkages between the illicit trafficking on firearms and the high level of violence and the commission of other crimes such as drug trafficking and the illicit trafficking of wildlife. Whenever we address this issue, it is important to not lose sight that as a crime, trafficking of firearms never comes alone. It is undertaken for the purpose of committing other crimes, to inflict harm on human beings, and to increase the capabilities of criminal organizations to challenge authorities. The illicit trafficking of firearms is normally carried in conjunction with other crimes such as money laundering and corruption. As you correctly pointed out, Madam Wally, it's a crime multiplier. Therefore, we see the findings of this study as a call to strengthen international commitments to prevent and to counter illicit firearms markets under the principle of common responsibility. We also see in this launching event as an opportunity to recognize and to support the efforts led by UNODC in this regard, and particularly through the work of the Global Program on Firearms. This kind of study contributes to better understanding the whole cycle of firearms and small and light weapons and ammunition. Firearms trafficking is not only a crime, but a threat to national security, to sustainable development, and to peace. We also consider this study as an opportunity to strengthen synergies and to call for a better implementation of international commitments, as well as a call to align our work from UNTOC to accelerate efforts for implementing SDG 16 and its target 16.4. Hence, Executive Director Wally, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I invite you again to go through this global study with a view to identifying ways in which all of us from our own area of expertise or competence can support the efforts led by UNDOC and all the other entities of the international architecture established to address and counter the illicit manufacturing and trafficking of firearms. I appreciate very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks. I'm, you know, the beauty of technology is that we can have you all watching from wherever you're sitting throughout the world in Vienna. But we do have limits to technology, and technology today has shown us some limits. We've had some issues, unfortunately, connecting with our high-level guest from the European Commission from Brussels. So I will have to hope that maybe if we can connect with him later, he can present later in the program. But at this point, I'm going to thank our high-level opening speakers and thank them for joining us today. And we're now going to move to the substantive part of the launching event of the Global Study on Firearms Trafficking. So thanks again to our high-level panelists. And the Global Study on Firearms Trafficking was drafted, it was, as was mentioned, a joint effort between UNODC's Research and Trend Analysis branch in cooperation with the Global Firearms Program. And this in-house partnership is reflected in the composition of the speakers of this panel, which will come from both the research and the implementation support side of the house. So, and we'll start the presentations. I'm very pleased to give the floor to Mr. Jean-Luc Lemayeux, who's the director of the Division of Policy Analysis and Public Affairs, who will give a brief introduction on the research undertaken for the global study. Jean-Luc, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much indeed, Ms. Valli, the Executive Director, the Ambassador Capizano Pina, to be here with us, and hopefully, while we haven't heard from Olivier Onidi, I mean, still very pleased to see this cooperation with the European Commission moving forward as close as we do on this and many other topics. So thank you very much for joining us here. It's a pleasure here to introduce the presentation which is to follow, and I will stay relatively short with that introduction. I think we are eager to hear more about the real meat and consistency of the report itself. I can tell you indeed, I mean, that we do know evidently that this is a concern for human society at large. I mean, it is affecting, as mentioned by previous speakers, our human security. It is central law enforcement in efforts and activities of UNODC, and as well, I mean, all the member states concerned. Having served many years in the Caribbean and Latin America, I have seen myself witness the havoc created by this trafficking of small arms. And as Ambassador Capizano Pina correctly stated, it is a crime multiplier. So indeed, I mean, we need to act on it, and this study is hopefully allowing us indeed to get the data, the evidence, and then we will hear from Simonetta later as well the policy recommendations, which would allow us to act as an international community. Firearms trafficking satisfies a demand for use in various unlawful activities. I am happy to refer as well to the Homicide Report 2019, where we indicated that 54% of the homicides worldwide, about 250,000 of human lives, were lost. I mean, due to homicides by firearms, small arms. So it is really a serious issue. And as you will hear from the presentation, which my colleagues within the research section will provide to you, we will talk about the flows, we will talk about the types, we will talk about how this trafficking is conducted, and then as well how it is related to other types of crime. Important as well, and again, Ambassador Pina, you mentioned that, is the connectivity with the target 16.4, the Sustainable Development Goal. One of the indicators is indeed to aim the proportion of, to measure the proportion of firearms traced to the illicit origin. Now, that is not an easy task to do. In fact, so far, we were only able as an international community to establish the illicit origin for 28% of the seized firearms. And that is largely thanks as well to the close cooperation which we benefit from with the World Customs Organization, which allows us to have access to this seizure data. but it really indicates, that we need to work closer with member states to increase their capacities to trace the origin of those firearms. The current report shows as well the need for further research on many topics related to firearms trafficking. As a global community, we need to collect added information on the profile and the punishment of offenders of small arms trafficking, the gender aspects related to firearms trafficking, and the profits made out of this trafficking, just to mention a few. But that will demand an investment of resources, financial resources, which regretfully today is not available to us. Finally, before giving the floor to my team, I would like to express my personal thanks to my team for this excellent work undertaken. I do know that indeed we have been extremely busy in recent weeks. From the World Drug Report to the World Wildlife Report, we as well had 2 research papers launched recently, one on the COVID-19 effects on the health sector and criminality, and the last one on COVID-19 effects on organized crime. So busy time. So I do hope indeed with this launch of this firearms trafficking that we can re-energize ourselves for the coming season then of new reports and research. Thanks as well, to our friends at the Division of Treaty Affairs, Simonetta and the team for this excellent cooperation we have benefited from, and we're looking forward to do more so. By this, I give you back the floor, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. So now I have the pleasure to invite Ms. Cristina Cangas-Punta, the chief of the UNODC's Crime Research Section, and Mr. Antoine Vella, who is the research officer with UNODC and the lead researcher of this study, to present the key findings of the global study. Cristina?
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to present these many results of the global firearms study. We actually cannot present all of the findings because the time is limited, but we try to highlight some of the issues which we find interesting. But of course, before going to the findings, we need first to see what is the data which we have used, because of course, the whole research is based on the data, and we wanted to have solid data in order to come up with these results. So try to change the slide. There is a okay. I wasn't strong enough in pressing the right button. So to go to the data, I would like to. Yeah, here it goes. The sources of data which we have used are shown here. The main source, which was mentioned already, is the illicit arms flow questionnaire, and we received responses from 80 responses were received mainly from the member states. We also used complementary sources for this study, specifically from the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs. Then we had these data from the World Customs Organizations, and then we have other official national sources which we have used. The data actually covers mostly the years 2016 and 2017. So to see actually which countries responded to our questionnaire, you can see on this slide the dark red color or the pinkish color. It represents those countries which sent a response to the questionnaire to UNODC. Then we have this lighter color, this orange type of color, which represents those countries which we could cover in the report. However, we use supplementary sources to find the information which we needed for the questionnaire. But of course, all this data has been also sent back to the countries, the member states, to check that it is correct. Then we have those places or those countries which are in gray color. These are those countries which we couldn't cover in this report and where we couldn't find information concerning firearms trafficking. As mentioned already, we wanted to know how many firearms were seized, and we found that 550,000 firearms were seized both in 2016 and in 2017. It was also mentioned that there are reasons why we believe that the global figure is much higher on the seizures, and they include underreporting for administrative reasons. The quality of data was varying quite significantly between countries, and of course then we have, as shown previously, we didn't receive information and responses from several countries. In this map, you can see actually the number of the rate of arms seized, which is covering the total number of arms seized by 100,000 population. And this is representing year 2017. And the darker the color on the map, the more we got seizures. So then, as you see, we got responses, or the seizures are higher in parts of North America as well, and in Australia. Then we have high seizure countries also in Southern America and in Europe. So this is actually a picture of the number of seizures, which is per 100,000 population. When looking at the type of those firearms which were seized, we could see that nearly 40%, 39% of seized firearms were pistols. So this was the biggest group by large. Then we had shotguns, which formed 25% of seized firearms, and then we have 18% of rifles and 14% of revolvers. So then we had a smaller amount of submachine guns and machine guns, and then some other firearms. We also had this kind of analysis at the regional level, and you can see quite large variety between different regions. So the pistols are the main category, which was or type of firearms which was seized in Americas and in Europe. Then in Africa and Asia, we have shotguns. And then in Oceania, we have the biggest group by far was rifles. When we look at the trafficking and diversion, I would like to show you first on the trafficking and what are the methods which are used for cross-border trafficking when firearms are trafficked from one country to another. We could identify sea trafficking, which was done through the sea, and in this case, it was interesting that even though we didn't have so large number of these seizures which were conducted through sea, the amount of firearms which were trafficked in one seizure was quite large. Then we have land trafficking, which was done by using different vehicles, and this was the largest method of trafficking. However, the number or the quantity of firearms which were in one seizure were not very large. So there were many of these seizures, but the quantities were quite small by seizure. We also identified trafficking by air and also some postal trafficking, so that the post was was used for trafficking, but these numbers were much smaller than the sea and land trafficking. And then one interesting trafficking method which we identified was this so-called ant trafficking, which means that there were one person is actually crossing the border, usually with one firearm, which actually the reason for using this kind of method is that it lowers the detection probability. But when you have a lot of these individual which have one firearm, they end up having a quite large number of firearms which are trafficked from one country to another. And this is one of the strategies which is used, for example, by organized crime groups, so that they could traffic firearms from one country to another with rather low detection threat. We also looked at the modalities for firearms to enter the black market. So we know that there is a life cycle for firearms, and they are rather durable commodity. So the life cycle can be quite long. So there are three different ways how this life cycle can appear. First one is that the firearm stays in the legal side the whole of the life cycle, and I'm not going to discuss that one naturally in this presentation. Then we have those firearms which actually are born legally, which are coming out of the manufacturer legally, but then they are diverted to become illegal in one point of their life cycle. And they have another life cycle as illegal weapons. And then we have a third option where the whole manufacturer is illegal, so the firearms are illegal from the beginning. So if you look at the scenario where the firearms are coming out as legal products from the manufacturer, and then how they then end up to the black market, we have firearms which are with the law enforcement or, for example, military, and through corruption, theft, or some other measures, they can end up to the black market. Then we have licensed dealers who actually can illegally there are illegal sales or theft. Or then there is another person or somebody is buying a firearm and give it to another person, so on behalf of another person, which also makes it illegal. Deactivated firearms can be reactivated. Then if we look at domestic markets, so that the firearms is staying in one country all the time, it can also become illegal through modification, for altering markings or illegal transfers. Or then when we look at the situation when the firearm is going from one country to another and becoming illegal in that process, we can have diverted exports where the firearms is actually ending up to another place where it was supposed to end up. Then we can have fake documentation, we can have clandestine shipments or mislabeling. Then when we look at those situations where the firearm is actually staying in the illegal side or all of its life cycle, we can have, in these cases, firearms which have been illegally assembled from parts and components. We can have conversion from other types of weapons. We also had some cases for 3D printing. And then we have this illegal artisanal manufacturing where the firearms are put together without any authorization. I will stop here, and I'm happy to give the floor to my colleague Antoine Vella, who actually is the person who did the analysis for this report. So I'm very happy that he can present some of the further findings.
Thank you, Tina. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to highlight some of the elements in this report. As Tina already mentioned, it would not really be feasible to go through the entire report, but I will just take it as an opportunity perhaps to point the audience to those elements which I find worth really delving into. I will actually begin by bringing in a slightly different angle into this discussion, because in addition to the main focus area of illicit flows and monitoring the illicit flows in terms of geography, etc., this exercise also catered for a separate mandate which UNODC has, which is its role as a co-custodian for indicator 16.4.2, which you see enunciated there. This falls within the new broader development paradigm in the SDG 2030 agenda, which brings in the dimension of rule of law and strong, peace, justice, and strong institutions. These kind of dimensions which were not recognized previously within the MDG scenario. So this particular indicator, which is associated with the reduction of financial and arms flows, but of course here we're interested in the arms angle, this indicator recognizes the importance of identifying the point in the long life cycle of a firearm at which the firearm goes from a legal status to an illegal status, which for legally produced firearms would normally be a clean transition, which we refer to as the point of diversion. In other situations where the firearm is born illegal, we're talking about something else. We're talking about the illicit manufacture, typically. So essentially, it should be, first of all, I should mention here that after we went through the data on this particular kind of information and we assessed it for consistency, coherence, went back to the countries, requested clarifications where it was necessary, it was really only possible to obtain data on this indicator for 14 countries. And then on the basis of those 14, of the data from those 14 countries and considering the relevant category of firearms, we assessed that approximately 28% on average was the proportion for which it was possible for law enforcement authorities to identify the point of diversion or the beginning of the illicit origin, is a better term, of seized firearms. I say seized even though the indicator refers to seized, found, and surrendered. And this was again a question of, in principle, the concept applies to seized, found, and surrendered, but due considerations of data availability and quality, for the moment, this is only referring to seized arms. So if we look a little bit more in detail at the situation here, first of all, it's important to keep in mind that one of the main tools which are used in the identification of the illicit origin, so in tracing the life cycle of a weapon and identifying the point at which it went from being legal to illegal, a crucial component in this picture is the presence of markings, which are already present, on the firearms, precisely in order to assist with the identification of the life cycle. Now, it's not the only way, but it is crucial, and it really impacts the practical process of identifying the point of diversion. So if we focus, you see those three protruding segments there, which represent the successful outcomes of this process, of the tracing process, whose objective is to identify the point of diversion. And you can see that overall there is essentially a 50-50 balance. It's 13% and 15% between, so 50-50 is an approximation, of course, between the domestically traced firearms and the internationally traced firearms. So the other component here to bring in mind, of course, is that countries have registries where the presence of a firearm is recorded, and the tracing outcome in some cases was successful in the sense that it could trace the diverted weapon to a national registry. But we're talking here of weapons which are not in the possession of the legitimate owner. So they are in the national registry, but not in the possession of the legitimate owner. That's one type of successful outcome. And the other one is when that's not the case, but it could be traced to a foreign registry by the seizing authorities. So we have about a 50-50 breakdown there. And well, it's also, you can also see the unsuccessful outcomes. So no tracing procedure initiated, tracing pending, or we don't even know if the weapon was marked or not, for example. So 28% is clearly a low figure, but also the 14 countries is also a very low figure, which shows that there is a lot to be done in terms of strengthening the data collection and the practice of tracing. It's a little bit difficult to disentangle the practicalities of the process from the data recording aspect of it, but clearly there is a need to institutionalize better the practice and the priority of identifying the illicit origin of a seized weapon and to record it and to make sure that there is a follow-up and that this information is used down the line. I will not talk more about that. I'll talk now a little bit about illicit flows. So we asked countries to give us information about seizures. Seizures are the main topic of the questionnaire, but there are different kinds of information we can ask about seizures, and one of them was to give us information about the routes along which the seizures were made. So given whenever police or law enforcement officers or customs officers made a seizure, they may or may not be able to identify where it was coming from. And this kind of information was used essentially under the assumption that this represents an illicit flow. So it represents a flow at the point where the firearm is already an illicit firearm. There's something wrong already with the firearm. So what you see here is essentially seizure information or routing information about seizure data interpreted as a picture of illicit flows. And here I have to say that the information provided by the World Customs Organization was extremely helpful in complementing our information, which we received through the questionnaire. So we asked for this kind of data from the questionnaire, but also we got some very valuable information from the World Customs Organization, which I acknowledge and recognize, and I appreciate very much. On the basis of this, we tried to depict the global picture of flows. It would be impossible for me here to go into all of these. I would really strongly urge the audience to look at these maps. This is the kind of an overall global map which focuses on the global picture, but we did the same kind of concept in more detail at regional level, so focusing on the European angle, on the Americas angle, etc. Here you see kind of the main ones, and maybe I can just comment about some general characteristics. So first of all, we observe a strong localized character of the trafficking flows. So, for example, if you look at subregions individually and you see where they are seeing weapons coming from, in most cases, the majority of incoming flows are coming from within the same region. So, for example, let's say the South American flows will be mainly coming from within the Americas. So within, for example, from North America. Same thing would go for Europe, etc. If we focus specifically on the interregional part, so if we kind of set aside the local or the intracontinental component and we focus on the interregional part, the main source countries or source regions would be Europe and North America, with a little bit from Western Asia. The Europe component is not very big, but it's interesting because it's very heterogeneous. It's very diversified. There's not a big flow, but it reaches quite a lot of different places. Then the other thing to keep in mind is, as I said, also within, for example, within South America, within Western Asia, there are strong components of intra-sub-regional, so localized flows. So again, I would urge you to browse through and look at these, explore these maps at regional level. One thing to keep in mind, maybe I go for a second back, is this is intended to reflect, and we hope it does reflect, only illicit flows. But the life cycle of a weapon is much longer, can typically be much longer than the illicit flows. So there is something which may happen before the firearm is trafficked, which is not reflected here. And so there is an extra dimension to add here. And I guess the one point I want to make is that there is more to the story. So, for example, if you look here from the perspective of South America, you can see that if you just focus on the country of manufacture, you see a very different picture from what you would see from the country from where the flows are coming from. So you can see in the outer ring, about 3/4 of the weapons, if you set aside the component within South America itself, 3/4 are coming from Europe. But if you look at the incoming flows, the vast majority is coming from North America. So it's quite a different picture, and these two things hook up. I don't want to take a lot of time. Maybe just one last point I want to make: the context in which seizures are made. You know, when law enforcement officers make a seizure, they have to justify the seizure. They have to say on what basis they are making the seizure. And as was already mentioned before, almost 2/3 of the scenarios are put under the concept of illicit possession. So simply the holder of the firearm has a firearm, but they should not have the firearm. And on that basis, the firearm is seized. But there could be much more in the background happening, which is maybe not reflected here. And part of it is simply practical, because obviously the information which is available at the point of seizure is not the whole picture, and the law enforcement officer may have limited opportunity to delve into the situation at the very point of seizure. But part of it could also be an issue also of awareness and prioritization of the concept of identifying the origin, the illicit origin of the weapon. So as you see there, arms trafficking as a legal justification is only 9% of the cases on average, which was already mentioned before. If you look at it on the basis of additional information which is provided, on the basis of suspicions, or on the basis of contextual information which is not used as a legal justification, that proportion goes up to 19%. So that would suggest that about 1/2 of the scenarios, the arms trafficking context is not reflected in the legal justification. Yeah, but it's even more than that, because this kind of reporting is essentially based on perception of the law enforcement officers, which probably also itself is an understatement, is an underestimate. So the 19% is probably even higher than that, which is why the 50%, the comparison between legal justification and arms trafficking, is probably an overrepresentation. And indeed, there are some additional analysis which are a little bit involved, and I won't present here, which suggests that it's actually, it could, for example, in the case of Africa, it's probably below 1/3. And in the case of Europe and Latin America, the data doesn't really allow it to give a precise estimate, but it could also be lower than 50%. And then the other linkages which we explored were the linkages with other forms of crime, which are emerged from the context of the seizures, which you can see there, and for example, violent crime, drug trafficking, very often or sometimes the data here again is only based on suspicions, on recorded suspicions, so it's likely an underestimate. But here, and again, I would encourage you to delve into the report itself. There are also very interesting regional perspectives. So what you can see here at global level, we also did the analysis at regional level. And for example, the violent crime aspect emerges most strongly in South America, Latin America, and in Africa, which is itself not surprising, given the data we have on, for example, homicide rates, etc. The link with trafficking, drug trafficking, but also for other forms of trafficking emerges most strongly in Europe. And then we also have a little bit of indications of a link with terrorism in Africa. I think I should stop there. And I really encourage you to maybe visit this website and explore more.
Thank you. And thank you, Christina and Antoine. I will give the floor now to Simonetta Grassi, who is the head of the Global Firearms Program. She will be focusing on the policy implications of the study and the support by UNODC to enhance evidence-based action to counter illicit firearms trafficking. And her discussion of the latter issue will include a presentation on several tools that are being developed and also a short video. So Simonetta, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, John. Distinguished participants, thank you very much. I will try to be short. As John has indicated, I have divided the presentation in two parts and will focus first on the policy findings. We can take the presentation out for the moment, only for the second part. So the global study on firearms trafficking allows us, as we have seen, to shed some light on the illicit circulation and trafficking in firearms, on the dimension, routes, modus operandi, and to draw some conclusions regarding the findings. And we have already heard a lot from Christina and from Antoine, and I would definitely like to commend our colleagues from the Research and Analysis branch and from the Global Firearms Program to have put together this analysis, because it is really a difficult undertaking, more difficult than maybe for other forms of crime, to draw some meaningful findings on the information that could be obtained from seized firearms, their context, their criminal context, their conditions. Starting with one of the first and smallest and preliminary positive aspects that we can highlight is that compared to the 2015 study, which was the precursor, if we can say so, of this study doubles the coverage of member states from whom we obtained information, which is per se already a very positive result. And we really hope to continue in the future to increase both the number and the accuracy of and the completeness also of the information, because this will allow us to provide better and more analysis to the international community. But when drawing conclusions on policy implications, I think beyond the actual findings of what the data tell us, what is also important to highlight is what is it that the data that does not emerge directly from the data. What is it that the reality on the ground is not able to show us through this data that we have compiled and analyzed? And I would like to focus on this. My colleague Antoine has already hinted a little bit on it, because these are the areas on which we will have to focus our efforts in the future, we, the United Nations, but especially and in particular member states, in order to more effectively and more efficiently tackle the problem of illicit firearms trafficking. There are two levels of considerations I want to refer to, and one is referred to the actual issue of firearms trafficking and what measures countries can put in place in order to enhance their response to this crime, and second, on the issue of the data collection exercise itself, and to look at how countries can actually improve their evidence base to better understand and monitor this phenomenon and to take informed decisions and measures on this. So let me start by the first element and just highlight some issues that I find interesting. We have seen from the previous presentation that firearms are central in the commission to many, many crimes. They are really very important crime enablers, and the statistics on homicide and even also on the data on the firearms seized in criminal context prove this issue. So we cannot and we should never underestimate the importance of looking at the firearms from that perspective. But when we look at firearms trafficking, for me, the most important finding is that firearms trafficking remains a largely invisible phenomenon. And this is reflected at all stages, from detection to recording to the criminal justice response and to the policy decisions that are taken in this regard. And allow me to elaborate a little bit on it. Illicit firearms are rarely intercepted at their point of diversion or when they are crossing borders, but only when they re-emerge from the underground market to the surface and when they are used to commit criminal activities. So this is the very important first issue. The arms are then recorded and treated as a tool that was used to commit a crime. The low initiation and success rate of tracing that was shown through the findings of the study is an additional indicator that shows that even that in many instances the concrete knowledge on where the weapons came from is not there. Countries don't know actually where the arms came from. So a first recommendation or a first conclusion would be that countries should definitely double their efforts to prevent, detect and intercept illicit arms flows, especially at borders and during transfers, including through enhanced border control and risk profiling capacities of relevant authorities. But this invisibility continues at the criminal justice level because investigators and prosecutors tend to focus more on proving the crime that was committed with the firearm than on exploring the illicit origin of these weapons. An average of 2/3 of the firearms that were seized were based on the ground of illicit possession, as my colleague Antoine just showed. Although the complementary contextual information and the tracing results could indicate that a considerable portion of these firearms may have been illicitly trafficked. This practice is also confirmed by many practitioners who inform us that they really face difficulties of legal and also of procedural nature to actually initiate criminal investigations into illicit firearms trafficking. So by continuing to focus on the seizures, we only obtain the first short-term result to take these single firearms out of circulation. But as long as we don't investigate and we don't try to prosecute the illicit firearms trafficking offense, we will never achieve tangible results in countering this crime because the illicit trafficking remains undisclosed and unattended. And I think this is one of the findings of the study, that the study could not prove a high amount of illicit trafficking. And that, as my colleagues also showed, the dark figure may be much higher. So a second conclusion for member states is that states should take more strategic and proactive approaches in their criminal justice response and look beyond the single firearms and really aim to also investigate and prosecute the underlying trafficking activity. Furthermore, we also identified through the study that there are close links between domestic and transnational movements of firearms. The study concludes that most transnationally trafficked firearms have been legally manufactured and diverted at the national level. So while there are clear differences between domestic and transnational movements and aspects, they require a joint analysis. And this includes also enhancing the legislative and regulatory systems to enable authorities to make this distinction. We have seen that sometimes also the data were not clear in distinguishing between these two dimensions. Another important observation is that most trafficked firearms were legally manufactured, so therefore the information exchange between seizing and manufacturing country is very important and could definitely contribute to enhance the responses of member states to this phenomenon, because also the country of manufacture could start investigations if informed that the firearms that were manufactured in their country were then seized somewhere else. And then there are policy implications that are drawn from the data collection exercise itself, and which reveal a consistent and persistent difficulty of countries to actually collect and analyze these data. This is also the reason why the study shows poor tracing practice and insufficient efforts to report on the tracing or outcome of the firearms, as this will reduce the likelihood to disclose and to counter illicit arms flows, but also to achieve and to monitor the Sustainable Development Goals. So the innovative approach that was adopted by UNODC through the project that has led to the development of this study is to combine research and national capacity building efforts. We can now show the presentation. And I'm coming to my last few words that I want to make in my intervention, which is to highlight a bit the work that we have done to support countries in enhancing their evidence base, to collect and analyze data, and to make actual use of those data. So the project was developed in the context of a monitoring illicit arms flow initiative, which is composed of 3 components: the development of tools that should help countries collect and gather the data, the technical assistance to raise awareness, and to strengthen the capacity not only to collect and analyze the data, but to share and make use of them in operational context in the actual research and analysis. And this is precisely the aim that we had to link criminal justice work with analytical efforts through technical assistance activities. I don't want to take much time because it is late. We just mentioned some of the tools that were developed. You can download them from the website. One is an issue paper that highlights the importance of evidence-based approaches and what can be done and used to better understand through data analysis on firearms. The other one is the actual support of a culture of evidence-based actions to counter firearms trafficking. And to this end, we have seen that countries face challenges in actually gathering the data that will help us understanding the flows. So we developed a template, guiding templates, which are available in English, French, and Spanish, to help countries actually collect the data properly from the ground, because if they are not collected properly at the beginning, it will be impossible to make further analysis in the future. And last but not least, we produced a small video that we are happy to share. That it is also available in English, French, and Spanish, and that summarize a little bit these efforts and how it is important to link data with evidence base. I would like to conclude by thanking everybody for their attention, and we of course remain at the disposal to respond to any question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simonetta, and that ends our substantive presentation. And now I do want to take the opportunity, because earlier we were unable to connect with Brussels, but now I understand that we do have a connection, and I don't want to lose the opportunity to invite Mr. Olivier Onidi, who is the Deputy Director General of the Directorate General for Migration and Home Affairs at the European Union Commission. Olivier, welcome today, and we're sorry we missed you earlier, but you have the floor, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, John, for this. I hope you can hear me. I wasn't aware to actually speak, but I followed the proceedings and the discussions with great interest. I must admit, my words would be simply to thank you for this partnership. In a sense, we're extremely pleased to have been able to sponsor somewhat this latest study. I think the executive director, Ms. Gadawali, explained very well the overall context, Mexican ambassador as well, how important it is to step up our efforts in terms of fighting the trafficking of firearms in all its forms. What is exemplary, I think, this year with this study is the considerable improvement in terms of the qualitative data and information that the different partners on the ground, with the help of some organizations like the World Customs Organization with your help, of course, as well, have managed to produce. And I think that was essentially the main weakness so far. We were confronted with somewhat of an information and data gap in this important sector. Throughout different waves of studies, we've initiated our cooperation with UNODC on this subject in 2015. We've seen, however, an improvement in the data that could actually be accessed, and also what could be done with this. This year, we also have, like, through the study, a well-established and internationally agreed methodology. You know, we able also to see quite a number of best practices emerging from this work. And we've seen also how useful it was for UNODC to prepare this study together with a number of actors on the ground. So essentially, my main message here towards UNODC, please do not stop your efforts in trying to build up even more momentum in order to get better data, in order to get better information on this very important aspect, so much linked with the development of organized crime in all its forms, and also terrorism, as we have heard. I think what made a big difference, if we look at what happened in the drugs sector, it was the fact that the UN General Assembly, as early as 1977, made a very, very strong commitment taken up by all members to provide better data on the trafficking of drugs. And I think on firearms, we need also to continue stepping up the momentum to get there, because we see that we still have a number of important gaps in our analysis. And this is important because it helps all contracting states in the UN to better implement UNTOC's, protocol. It's still unfinished business. It does help also all jurisdictions to better modernize and constantly improve their own national legislative framework. I mean, we've done that in the EU on a regular basis. We've done it recently. We've modernized our regime for import and export of firearms. We've fundamentally reviewed also the overall legislative framework on firearms, codifying from the detection to the criminalization, so to say, on this. And it also helps, I think, in better targeting technical assistance towards different jurisdictions in the world. Here as well, I think we have continuously improved and increased the financing available to all members of the UN in order to fight trafficking of firearms and modernize the different measures that are being taken. And this study is a further encouragement, I think, to do more and better targeted, even better. So with all this, a frank thank you to all those researchers and also administrators who have been involved in this work. Today is just the first in the release of the study. I'm also very pleased that we will have another opportunity as early as mid-September, and the date will be communicated widely very soon, to have a dedicated webinar in order to not only present the study in more detail, but also for us to present to you our latest action plan on firearms, which for the first time integrates other countries. It's not only an action plan that covers all EU member states, it will also cover all the Western Balkan countries in a totally integrated manner. So these two, the action plan on the European side, as well as this latest study, will be presented to you in this webinar. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for all the work on this. And please continue mobilizing everyone to constantly improve even further the availability of tangible information and data on this important subject. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olivier. It's good to see you, even virtually. And as we've said before, thank you to the European Union for its great support of our work. You know, I'd like to just give one more speaker the floor. We have someone here from the World Customs Organization, Mr. James McComb, who's the manager of the WCO security program. And he is responsible for the WCO. They have their own small arms and light weapons project, and he has helped facilitate broader cooperation on the study, and they've provided a significant amount of data for UNODC to integrate into the study, and so we really appreciate their contributions. And I want to just give the floor, if I may, just briefly to Mr. McComb. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I will be very brief. The WCO firstly would like to congratulate the UNODC on the launch of the global study on firearms trafficking. From the WCO perspective, we see this as a very, very useful resource, and it is a compendium of that knowledge that we have, a compendium of the seizure information, and from that it details patterns and trends related to the illicit trade and illicit flows of firearms and ammunition. And that in turn serves to inform the international community and nation states, and from our point of view, our customs members, about the international and regional dynamics of the illicit firearms trade. And it is, it is a basis for future sound policy making and operational responses. The WCO itself was very pleased to be able to share its SEND data, and I thank all the speakers who preceded me for referencing that data and that relationship that we had. We're very pleased to be able to share it with the UNODC for this piece of work and for any future analysis of firearms flows. For those of you not aware, WCO SEND database lists all customs seizures reported to the WCO by our 183 members. It's not a full set of data, but it's a pretty large international piece of data. And it goes back to the initial approach the UNODC made to the WCO, requesting that we share the data back in the summer of 2018. And we were able to share all the data we had for the years 2016 and 2017 related to firearms and ammunition seizures that were reported on SEN, and that's fed into the global study. And again, we're very pleased that this made a significant contribution to the global study and enabled some of the analysis that we saw being presented earlier. From the outset of the initiative, it was strongly supported by our ex-director, Anna Hinojosa, and she would have been very pleased with the final report and the outcome of the global survey. Today, our Secretary General, Dr. Cuneo Mikuria, remains very supportive of the relationship between UNODC and WCO and is keen to expand the range of activities in which our two organisations cooperate. The WCO sees the launch of this report as a starting point where we assess opportunities for future cooperation in relation to addressing illicit firearms flows. Besides the sharing of small arms and light weapons data, the WCO has a long history of cooperation with the UNODC, having several long-standing joint projects, including the Container Control Programme and AirCop. We look forward to continued collaboration and addressing the scourge of the illicit firearms trade. So thank you, and I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Obviously, all the contributions and cooperation with WCO. We had several questions that were asked on the chat function of today's meeting, and we unfortunately don't have time to answer the questions, but what we will do is try to answer them in writing on the chat room itself. So you will, those that have joined the meeting today can, a little later, they'll see the answers, some answers to their questions in written form in the actual chat room. So I apologize for not being able to put them out here to answer them at the session itself. But some of these questions, a lot of them relate to how we may operationalize the findings and move forward with this, including with capacity building, technical assistance, and also on a regional level and geographic level. And I do want to mention, excuse me, that we do have planned a series of regional webinars related to the report, where we will talk about the report and the findings in the regional context. Excuse me. So I'm going to end with a video. So if we can put the video on the screen.
From gang violence to organized crime and terrorism, illicit firearms are involved in many types of crimes. But how much is known of their origin? When investigating firearms, each step of the process reveals important information combining into an evidence base for effective results against firearms trafficking. During a seizure, recording the weapon's type, model, serial number, and criminal context in which it was used is crucial. Full examination of the weapon, including forensic and ballistic analysis, provides investigative leads and may help establish the modus operandi used by criminals. It may, for instance, reveal that the weapon was illicitly reactivated, that its markings were modified, or that it was used in previous crimes. Tracing the last legal record of a firearm is also vital to identify its point of diversion. If it is not registered in the country of seizure, international tracing mechanisms and bilateral requests can then help identify its illicit origin. The sum of this knowledge allows authorities to understand firearms trafficking flows, trends, and patterns. To strengthen, promote, and build upon the crucial work of criminal justice systems, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has launched the Monitoring Illicit Arms Flows Initiative. Data on seized and trafficked firearms, as well as context of seizure, are collected through a network of national focal points via the Illicit Arms Flows Questionnaire, and are complemented with other member states' data. The totality of these data are then analyzed to identify transnational firearms trafficking flows, trends, and patterns, helping countries to gain deeper insight into illicit firearms flows and how they affect each country, region, and the world. The Monitoring Illicit Arms Flows Initiative is integrated in the Global Firearms Program along with policy and legislative development, preventive and security measures, strong criminal justice response, and international cooperation. Related technical advices, capacity building, and provision of tools, equipment, and platforms support member states in becoming more efficient in preventing and countering trafficking of firearms and associated items, as well as related forms of crimes. At international level, several instruments address the issue of firearms from complementary angles. With the adoption of Target 16.4 of the Sustainable Development Goals, the importance of fighting illicit firearms flows was also recognized by member states as an important means to achieve peace, justice, and ultimately development. The Global Firearms Program supports countries in attaining and monitoring this target. Join us in countering illicit arms flows.
Okay, that will be the end of our program. I want to thank all the speakers and those that put together this great report. And you can get more information on the webinars. I think they will be available on the UNODC website. Thank you again for joining us today. The session is closed. Thank you.